The morning my fence disappeared, I thought someone had made a mistake, a stupid mistake, the kind that gets fixed with one phone call and an apology. But by the time the sun came up over the rooftops and I saw that bright orange notice tied to a metal stake in the grass, I realized something much colder had happened. My fence wasn't missing. It had been taken. And according to the HOA, they had every right to do it. Now, if you've ever lived in one of those neighborhoods with perfectly trimmed lawns and matching mailboxes, you know the type of place I'm talking about. Everything looks peaceful from the outside. Quiet streets, polite neighbors, the illusion that everyone's life is running smoothly. But there's another layer under that calm surface: rules. Rules about paint colors. Rules about grass height. Rules about what kind of flowers you can plant and what kind of fence you're allowed to build. Most people just follow them. Not because they care, but because it's easier than fighting. That morning, I stepped out onto my porch with a mug of coffee and froze halfway down the steps. The cedar fence along the edge of my yard was gone. Every board, every post, gone like it had never existed. In its place stood a thin metal rod with that orange notice flapping in the breeze. I walked over and read it once. Then again. Structure removed due to violation of community aesthetic guidelines. Clean language. Polite language. But the message underneath was simple. They had decided my fence didn't belong, so they erased it. Behind the curtains up and down the street, I could see movement. People watching, trying not to be obvious about it. Nobody said a word, because everybody knew who had done it. The HOA, more specifically Mrs. Caldwell, president of the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association for nearly 10 years. A woman who believed order was the same thing as peace. I stood there at the curb staring at the empty property line, feeling something tighten in my chest. That fence wasn't just wood and nails. My father and I built it together. 15 summers ago, he had shown up one Saturday morning with a truck full of cedar boards and a toolbox older than I was. We spent the whole weekend digging post holes and arguing about measurements while he told the same stories he'd told my whole life. By Sunday evening, the fence stood straight and solid. He ran his hand along the boards and said something I didn't fully understand at the time. Strong boundaries don't need a shout. That fence stayed there long after he passed. Every plank carried a memory. So standing there that morning looking at the empty space where it used to be felt like someone had quietly erased a piece of him, I read the notice again. The last line made my jaw tighten. Non-compliant structures will not be restored. Meaning that was it. End of discussion. But what the HOA didn't know was something very simple. I wasn't planning to restore the fence. No, I was planning something they wouldn't be able to remove. Something they wouldn't even have the authority to touch. By noon, the entire street was buzzing with quiet speculation. You could feel it in the way neighbors slowed their cars down passing my house. In the way conversations stopped when I stepped outside. Everyone wanted to know what I was going to do. Nobody wanted to ask. Inside my garage, I sat on a stool, staring out at the empty property line. Without the fence, the yard looked strangely larger. But it also felt exposed, like someone had taken the front door off your house and left it open to the street. My phone buzzed again. Another HOA email. This one politely reminding me that approved boundary solutions must be installed within 7 days or fines would begin accumulating. Approved. That word echoed in my head for a long time. Approved meant controlled. Approved meant permission. Approved meant they believed the final decision about my property belonged to them. That evening, I dug through an old cabinet and found the construction notebook my father used when we built the fence. Inside were sketches, measurements, little notes written in thick pencil. On the inside cover was that same sentence again. Strong boundaries don't need a shout. I stared at it for a long time. Then slowly the idea came together. If the HOA wanted rules, I would give them rules. Perfectly followed. 2 days later, a surveyor arrived at my house. By afternoon, small neon markers lined the edge of my yard like tiny flags in the grass. Neighbors pretended to check their mail while secretly counting them. Across the street, Mrs. Caldwell stood on her balcony watching everything. Arms crossed, expression tight. When the surveyor finished mapping the property line, I photographed every measurement, every angle, every zoning allowance, because whatever I built next would obey every regulation the HOA had ever written. 3 days later, the delivery truck arrived. Out came steel posts, reinforced bases, and thick transparent panels that looked like glass under the sunlight. Neighbors gathered at a distance, pretending to walk their dogs. It looks expensive. It looks permanent. It looks strange. They weren't wrong. I installed everything slowly, carefully. No rush. No arguments. By sunset, the structure stretched along the entire edge of my property. It reflected the sky like a sheet of still water. Technically, it wasn't a fence. Technically, it wasn't a wall either. According to the HOA bylaws, it qualified as a transparent decorative boundary installation, which meant one very important thing. They had no rule against it. The panels allowed sunlight through. They didn't block sight lines. They stayed exactly within the legal height limit. Every single regulation was satisfied, but standing in front of it, you felt the boundary immediately. Nobody stepped across it. Nobody needed to be told. Mrs. Caldwell spent that night going through the HOA rulebook page by page. I know because her light stayed on past midnight. Height limits, compliant. Visibility rules, compliant. Property setbacks, compliant. The installation violated nothing, and somehow that made it even more frustrating for them. A few days later, the HOA inspection team showed up. Clipboards, measuring tapes, serious faces. They walked the entire perimeter taking photos. I stood nearby sipping iced tea. "Does this structure obstruct visibility?" one inspector asked. "No." "Does it exceed height limits?" "No." "Is it technically a fence?" "No." Every answer ended the same way. "It complies." They measured again and again. Eventually, they packed up and left. No violation notice ever arrived. But something unexpected started happening. People began asking questions. Not about my barrier, about the rules themselves. A retired teacher down the street asked why privacy fences were banned in the first place. A young couple asked why approvals took months while removals could happen overnight. Another resident asked why HOA compliance felt more like punishment than cooperation. Suddenly, the conversation had shifted. It wasn't about my yard anymore. It was about trust. At the next community meeting, the room was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls. People who had never attended before came just to watch. Mrs. Caldwell opened the meeting with routine updates. But hands started rising immediately. Questions, concerns, years of quiet frustration finally finding a voice. I sat in the back row listening, because the truth is I had never intended to start anything. I just wanted my boundary back. Eventually, someone asked if I wanted to speak. I stood slowly. "I followed every rule," I said. "I just needed a way to protect my home without losing the memory attached to it." The room grew quiet, because suddenly people understood something deeper. This wasn't about a dispute. It was about dignity. And that was the twist nobody expected. Not the glass panels. The conversation. Over the following weeks, something in the neighborhood changed. Neighbors talked longer on sidewalks. People stopped hiding behind closed garage doors. The tension that used to sit in the air like static slowly faded. One evening, Mrs. Caldwell walked past my yard and stopped beside the transparent panels. Her reflection looked back at her. For the first time, she didn't look like a president enforcing rules. She looked like a neighbor thinking about them. At the next board meeting, a proposal appeared. Revise the boundary guidelines. Allow personalized fences as long as they met safety and design standards. The vote passed unanimously. A week later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. I was officially allowed to rebuild my wooden fence if I wanted. I read the letter twice. Then I looked at the transparent panels reflecting the evening sky, and I realized something surprising. I didn't want the old fence anymore, because the boundary had already done its job. So instead of rebuilding it, I planted flowering shrubs along the inside edge. In spring, they bloom soft white, a living reminder that protection doesn't have to mean division. One afternoon, Mrs. Caldwell stopped by while I was watering them. "I thought I was protecting the community," she said quietly. "You were," I told her. "We just forgot what community actually feels like." Autumn arrived not long after. Golden leaves drifting across driveways. Kids riding bikes again. The neighborhood looked the same, but something underneath had shifted. My yard still looks open from a street. The panels are nearly invisible at sunset, but everyone respects the boundary now. And I've thought about that a lot since then. My father was right. Strong boundaries don't need to shout. They just need to be clear enough that people understand where respect begins. So here's the question I keep coming back to. When rules stop protecting people and start controlling them, is it better to fight those rules directly or quietly show everyone why they no longer make sense? I'm curious what you think. Have you ever dealt with an HOA or any authority that pushed things too far? And if you did, what did you do about it?